My name is Luca Bolognese, and today we are going to talk about Azure Lab Services. Azure Lab Services is a service that allows you to have labs in the cloud. So to have a set of VMs, virtual machines, that you can manage as a group, that you can use to to set up laboratories where all the machines start out as the same. And this product has been out for quite a few years, and it has wide usage in the education space, but you can also use it for hackathons or trainings or things like that. In this presentation, I want to go through the whole product, show all the features in the product. A few of them are quite recent. We had a big update to the service in April 2022, in case you are watching this from the future. And there are a lot of new features. So as I go through the presentation, I'm going to point out the things that are new, so that if you are used to the kind of previous version of the service, you would see the differences immediately. Okay. All right. So let's start. So the first thing that you need to do, first of all, the product assumes three different personas. One is the IT person that sets up the product, and this part of the service is still inside the Azure UI, because that's what we think is most familiar to IT people. Then there are people who need to create labs. For example, professors that want to run a math course, and their kind of UI is completely outside of Azure. We try to make it as simple as even if you are not a software person, you should be able to use it. And then there are the students, and their view is again outside of Azure, and we try to make it as simple as possible. Okay, but let's start with setting up the product. Okay, in the previous version, before April, you would have to use a lab account. So create a new lab account in your Azure subscription. To use the new feature, instead, you have to create a lab plan. Okay, a lab plan is well, it's not really a container, but it's more of a recipe to create labs. So you set up some things that are common across all the labs that are created using this lab plan. There are a few things that you need to set up front, and some others that you can set up after you have created a lab plan. So you need to pick a subscription for your lab plan to be in, and a resource group. A resource group is a container of resources in Azure. Okay, you can have multiple. It's like a hierarchical structure. You have a subscription. Inside subscription, there are resource groups. Inside the resource groups, you can have lab plans, and lab plans contain labs. You have to pick a name for your lab, like this, for example, and a region. Okay, a region, you can have labs inside the lab plan that are in different regions, but the region is important because of the next feature, which is networking. Okay, so networking allows you to specify a network, a VNet, for example, this one, and a subnet, where you want your kind of lab network resources to be created. Normally, this is done, if you don't click this button, this is completely outside your network topology. And that's for security reasons, so that you don't have to worry about, about security, because it's outside of your university network, so to speak. But if you need access to the university network, more often for for example, because you have a licensed server that the VMs need to contact to run a product, or something that is common across many labs, then you might want your labs to be able to connect to your intranet, and you do that through this screen, advanced network, and the lab plan needs to be in the same region as the network that you're connecting to. Okay. In the past, this was called network peering, and it was working okay, but there were many cases where it wouldn't work. And now with the new kind of update to the service, now we can cover a much wider range of network topologies. Okay. And we have plenty of documentation on how to set it up. Just if you just search for it, it will appear as number 1 or number 2 in your search request. You can specify tags. We automatically create tags for you to identify your resources, your VMs, your labs, and such. And this is again a bit of a difference from the previous service, in that now labs and VMs are real Azure resources. So you can track cost much more granularly than in the past. In the past, it was more of a black box. The only thing that you can easily see was the lab account, while now labs, VMs, they are all kind of separate resources that you can operate on more independently. You can also have an ARM template that allows you to deploy all those things, because now they are integrated deeply inside Azure. Okay, so you can set up your own tags, and then you can go and create the plan, and it takes about 5 minutes or so. But let's not let's not lose time, and then take a look at one that already exists. Oh, in the meantime, let me refresh this, because I know that otherwise, it kind of logs me out for security reasons. Okay, so let's take a look, for example, at this lab plan here. Again, the lab plan is a recipe to create a lab. The first thing that you need to remember, and this is very important, is that with the new service, you have to request your core, how many VMs and which size of VM you need upfront. So that button right there is very important. If you know you are going to run a class in the future with 100 VMs, you have to request your cores upfront. Okay. In the past, we didn't require that, but then we ended up with situations where people will try to run classes, but they were not core available in the region that where they wanted, especially for GPU and things like that. And so for the new version of the service, we decide to make this action explicit, so that when you run your class, you are sure that there are no problems. Okay. Then you might want to define who have the power to create labs. And you do that through the access control here, or clicking on Add Lab Creators. And then you add role assignments for the people. You might decide that professors can create labs, or IT people, but you have to decide who can do so. In the past, we just have lab creator as a role, and perhaps lab contributors. But the universities told us that they want more granularity and have different roles of what, that specify what someone can do in the lab. So we created the concept of a lab assistant and a lab operator. And those are people who have less power on the lab. They can do less things. For example, they can start VMs, but not add capacity to the lab. And so that's another thing that is new that we created. So here you specify who you want to be able to create labs. Okay. Okay. Once you know that, let's go and set up some more feature in your lab plan. This feature here under lab settings are things that you can set as well at the lab level. And I prefer to talk about the shutdown and disconnect when I talk about labs. But this you set default, here you set default, that then are what will be the default for the labs. Enable regions is again a new thing, and you can use it to allow to specify in which regions your lab creators are allowed to create labs. For example, a lab creator that creates a lab under this lab plan will just be able to do it in East US. And by clicking on this button, you can add more regions to it or remove some. LMS settings is again a new feature in the update. So we have deep support with Canvas, which is the first LMS we've built support to. And we are also working on supporting other LMS. And if you click here, it will explain to you exactly how to set up the syncing between your Canvas class and your labs. Okay. Marketplace images is where you define which of the standard Azure images your lab creator are allowed to use when creating a lab. This takes a while because Azure has been accumulating images for a long time. Okay, for example, those are all the Linux images here. And I have enabled these three, and those are all the Windows images, of which I have enabled these four. Okay, so when someone goes and create a lab, those are the images. And again, an image is a snapshot of the disk. Okay, so here you choose what is going to be on the disk of each one of your VMs in the lab. Okay, so those are the choices the lab creators have when they create the lab. You can also have your own custom image, which is specific for your university. And you do that through the Azure Compute Gallery, which is a service that is external to Azure Lab Service, but we tie them together because they work really well together. So in this case, I have enabled my own custom image that contains whatever programs are kind of needed in my university or in my department or for my course. Okay. And so when the lab creator creates a lab, he will see the custom images as well. And I will show you how to easily create one of those. The last thing on a lab plan is the support, where you specify some information that then will be shown to your student in your lab. Okay, so this is what a lab plan is. In essence, is a recipe to create labs. Okay, so those are kind of labs here. So that was the previous screen for IT people, and it's a one-shot kind of thing. You create a lab plan, and then your university uses it. This is the screen for professors that want to create labs. Okay, so those are all the labs that they have created, 3 in this case. To create a new lab, you need to specify a name for it. And we try to make these as simple as possible. And then you have to choose which image you want for your lab. And here, the lab creator will just see the images that you have enabled for him. Okay? So here is where you can specify a custom image so that, for example, when a lab creator comes here, the only thing that he sees is your own custom image for your university, okay? If that's your decision. And then you have to pick a size for your VM. Size is a number of students, is what determines the cost for your lab, okay? And we have a large number of sizes that you can choose from. In our service, each student has his own VM, virtual machine. And this is the same virtual machine that they can get every time they connect to the course, okay? So that if they save their homework, they find it back when they connect again, okay? Sometimes you need for a student to have access to multiple VMs. And in that case, you can use nested virtualization here to give the student one VM, but that VM inside contains multiple VMs. Okay, so you can run some courses that way. Okay, so these are the three most important things: the name, the image, and the size. Then you specify a username like this, the password. You can give node-admin account to the students. You can decide to use the same password for all the VMs, or you can, the service can ask the first time that they log in what their password should be. Okay? And then, well, here you specify the quota, which is how many hours they have on each VM outside of the class hours, and which connection type you want to allow. This is a Linux VM, so you can use either SSH or RDP to connect. And this is the similar screen as before, but I want to talk about it later. And the last thing that you want to do is this point here, and this is important to understand. You can either decide to use the virtual machine image without customization. And what that means is that once you create the lab and you click on the finish button, then you cannot modify the image that is used to create the virtual machines, okay? You choose an image in the previous step, and that's it. That's the one that is going to be used. And this is takes about 5 minutes to create a lab, and you cannot modify the image afterward. But if you decide create a template virtual machine, so what's going to happen is that a template VM is going to be created in the lab, which has the image that you choose. But before publishing that image to all the other virtual machines, you can connect to it and install other programs on the image, and then you can publish it. So if you need to modify the image to install some other stuff, then this is the way to do it. I will talk a bit more about template when we look at labs. Okay, so let's take a look at one of the labs. So you click on create and the creation goes on. And when it's finished, you find yourself on this screen. Okay. So that's kind of the dashboard for the lab. And this is the estimated maximum cost for this lab. And this is calculated by taking the quota hours, which is how many hours you have allowed each student to use the VM outside their class hours, plus the class hours, and that's the total number of hours, the maximum number of users multiplied by that, and multiplied by the size of the VM. And what you get at the end is the maximum cost. So you are going to pay this just if everyone shows up for every class and they all use their complete quota hours, okay? Which is very unlikely, to be honest. But at least you have a maximum number that you can use to predict the cost of your class, okay? Now let's go through all the screens in a lab, so to show you what you can do with it. The first is the template, okay? For this particular lab, there is not a template VM. Okay, so you cannot connect to anything. You can just publish the lab. So you use the image, and the image is pushed directly to all the VMs in the lab. Okay, but let's pick one which has a template, like this one, I think, if I remember correctly. Oh, no, not this one. This one, perhaps. Okay, yeah. So this one is one that you created by specifying that you want a template VM in the lab. A template VM is a VM like all the other, but it is special. It is special, well, yeah, it is a bit special. In that you can start it like this, you can connect to it, and you can install additional programs that are not already on the VM, or you can modify on the VM, or you can modify the image in whatever way you want. If you end up with an image that you like, that you want to reuse for other labs, then you can click on this button, export to Azure Compute Gallery, and the image will be exported to the compute gallery that is attached to your lab plan. So you will find it here. You remember when we talked about Azure Compute Gallery, your new image, university, physics image will be here, and you can enable it so that everyone that creates a lab from then on will see that image, okay? So that's how you create a custom image for your own university or department, okay? So let's continue looking at this. So we talked about the template. Let's talk about user, how you invite users to your labs. So first of all, you can do it manually by either writing the email address here or uploading a CSV file, which all the emails of your users. Or you can tie these to a few things. And let's I think it's this one. No, is this one? No, I don't think so. It's still this one. So here you can do it just once. You can choose to sync from an Active Directory group, so that whenever someone is added to the group, they automatically get a virtual machine. You can also tie it to a Canvas class, or also to a team channel, so that whenever you add someone to the channel, automatically they get a VM, okay? So you can either do it manually, tie to an Active Directory group, to a team channel, or to a Canvas class, okay? So that's how you specify users for your class here. Also, there are two modes. In restrict access, then you need the user to be in this list and to have a registration link. The registration link, you can copy it, put it on the home page for your course. For example, you can send it via email or whatever you want. The user can click on the registration link and they will connect to the lab, okay? You can also select all your users, click on invite, write a message for them, and when you click send, an email will be sent with the link embedded in it, okay? Moreover, you can adjust the quota for all the users or for a particular user, because maybe like this, because maybe he forgot, his machine open and he has exhausted all the hours that you have given him. Oh, sorry, I was talking about the restrict access. So with restrict access, you need the user to be here, and you also need to have a registration link. With unrestricted access, then you just need the registration link. This list is not used at this point, and this is useful. For example, if everyone is in a single room and you want all of these guys to have access to your lab, then you do you just send them the registration link and you don't bother to add them to this list, and they connect and they are good. Okay. Okay. We talked about quota. Quota is the maximum number of hours allocated to each student. Okay. When the limit is reached, the VM will shut down. But those hours are outside the class times. And you schedule the class time here in the schedule thing. You can decide that you have classes on Wednesday and Friday, for example, between 10, well, that's a strange thing, between 12 and 12:35, between until October the 8th, for example. So when this time arrives, when 12 arrives, then the VMs will start up. And when this time comes, the VMs will shut down. And this is done so that when the student comes to class, the VM has already started. So you don't need to wait for the VM to start, which takes a few minutes. But by setting a schedule event, then it will start automatically, so that it's ready when the student comes. There is also stop-only event that you can use as a fail-safe mechanism. So stop all the VMs at this time. So if someone has forgotten, is on VM, you can decide to shut it down every night, for example. And I use this, I think, here as a fail-safe mechanism if I forget to shut down my VM that I use for the demo. Okay, so those are scheduled times. And then there is the quota time. Some universities, they just use the schedule. They don't use the quota. Others, they use just the quota. They give like 40 hours to each student for a semester. While most, I think, they use both the schedule for class time and the quota for homework time. But you have the flexibility to do what you want. Okay? The virtual machine pools is where you can do actions that are common across multiple VMs. For example, you can select all of them and stop them all together, or even more useful, start them all together. Maybe they change your class time, so your schedule is out of date. And you say, oh, I forgot to change my schedule. So just before the class, you come here and you start the VM, all the VMs. And when the class ends, you just stop all of them and you're done. No, not pay more than that. You can also reset a VM or multiple ones here. And what that does, it just destroys the VM, so that the next time that a student comes in, they get a completely fresh VM, which has the image that you choose. And this is useful in case the student screwed up his VM. Instead of going and try to understand how to fix it, you can just blow it and then it starts again. That is one reason why we recommend to store the homework on some external cloud drive or something external to the VM. Because if you store it in the VM and then you need to reset the VM, you are going to lose the homework, so to speak. Even if we recommend that, I have to say most people don't do it anyway. They feel that the chances of having to reset a VM is low enough, or the homework is not as important, so that it can be stored on the VM disk with no problem. But kind of you have been warned. Okay, so we talked about template, the virtual machine pool, how to add users, and quota, the schedule. The last thing is the settings. And these are things that we have added to try to save you money, in essence. So the first is shut down virtual machines when they are idle. And you can decide what idle means for you and after how much time this is done, so that if a student forgets to shut down a machine, it will be done automatically. And this, sometimes it works, sometimes you don't want it, because maybe the student is running some long, I don't know. There are scenarios while you might need it or not. Shut it down when the user disconnects. Again, this is something that you can do. And or when the user do not connect, which is particularly useful if you're using the schedule and a class starts, then we will start all the VM for that class. But then let's say half the students show up. So if you didn't set this up, you will be paying for all the VMs, even if half the students showed up. So what you can do instead with this feature is, okay, it's after 15 minutes, no one is connected, then shut down the VM. Okay, so those are, and those three things work for both Linux and Windows. In the past, they used to work just for Windows, but we extended the feature to work for both. Okay. So that's all a professor needs to understand to create labs and to, to manage a lab that they have created. And again, here they see all the labs that belongs to them. Okay. So we talked about the view for the IT person that sets up the service, the professor, and this is the student view. I have been accumulating a lot of courses in these years, but yeah, those are all. So here the students see big boxes. Each one of them is a course they have access to at that point in time. Or it's a VM that you have given them quota, like this one, where you have given them 10 hours and they have used just a few minutes of it. Okay, so they can start it, connect, and use it. They can see also the VMs when they have exhausted their quota, like this one, transfiguration, and they're, they cannot connect because they don't have any more time on that VM, and it's not class time right now. You can connect to a VM simply by clicking this button and clicking here. This is a Windows VM, so we will be using RDP to connect. There are RDP clients for all sorts of operating systems and devices. So that's how you do it for Windows. And it's take a bit of time because it's in a different region than the one, kind of the one I'm in, unfortunately. So it takes a bit more than it will normally take. So yeah, so now you are kind of connected to the VM. You can see that, these VMs are quite a nice network connection. So this is how to connect to a Windows virtual machine. For Linux, you can connect by, and this one, it's a Linux one, as you see from the penguin up there. You can, the student can connect through SSH, for example, like I'm doing here. Like this, and now I'm in. Like this. Or they can connect through RDP if you have set up an RDP server, or for some, for example, the data science one, you can connect through X2Go, which is a rather fast protocol. So if you have chosen, for example, the data science image, then it has already an X2Go server installed, and you can just connect using an X2Go client. And again, this is in a different region than where I am, so it's going to take, slightly more time than it will normally do for you. Okay, so here it comes. All right, so yeah. So I'm connected now to this one using X2Go. Okay, so there are a variety of ways to connect to these VMs, both Linux and Windows. At the moment, we don't have a way to connect through simple HTTP, so through a website, but it's something we are working on, and so expect it to come in the future. Okay. All right. So we have looked at the IT person view, we have looked at the professor view, and the student view. Now let's take a look at some resources that might be useful for you. One is the Azure pricing calculator. You come here and you say Azure Lab Services. You specify the size of the VMs in your lab, how many students, the number of hours, and it calculates the kind of the maximum price for you that you are going to pay. Again, be careful, this is the maximum price, okay? If everyone uses all their hour and kind of they come to all the classes, okay? Some other resources that are useful for you. The documentation has many interesting links. For example, the administrator guide is one that I particularly like, and it goes through kind of everything, how to set up your subscription, your resource group, the lab plans, and it has, you know, some rule of thumbs of, you know, how to name things and things like that. So if you want to introduce this service in your universities, that this is a good starting point for you to go and read, okay? And then there are other creation, lab plan creation guide, lab creation guide. There is a documentation, it's quite good for this. But if you need something beyond the documentation, during all these years, we had experience working with many schools. And there is something, the Azure Lab Services blog. If you search for it, that's going to be #1 hit. And it's got all sorts of advanced topics, like how to have nice graphs of the cost for your lab, user stories, like this one, for example, how to run PowerShell scripts, how to run a cybersecurity course, so on and so on. It's got all the things that we have found, or a lot of the things that we have found the customers have needed during the year. So that's kind of their first stop after the documentation, okay? And perhaps your third stop is this Azure class type. And this is, again, this is a list of classes that people have run using the product. And as you can see, the list is quite long here. And for each one of those classes, there is a description of how to do it, step by step. And there are also PowerShell scripts that helps you in creating those classes, okay? All those PowerShell scripts are inside this GitHub repo. Everything that I have showed you through the UI, you can do through PowerShell and also through C#. So, and the kind of the library, the PowerShell library is inside the AZ module. So if you are using PowerShell with Azure, you need to have the AZ module, because that's what contains all the PowerShell scripts. And Azure Lab Services is there. And again, this is a new thing with the update. So now you don't need to install anything extra. It's just part of standard Azure. There are more things here. There are, you know, the classes, scripts for the classes that I have showed you before. But perhaps even more interesting, there is this bulk operation folder that contains a set of scripts that we created in case you need to deploy Azure Lab Services in a very wide kind of installation. So for example, you want to deploy 100 labs, and each lab has 50 VMs. Okay, you don't want to do it by hand through the UI. You're going to get old very quickly. But you want to do it through some kind of automated way. But it's not trivial to build, because, you know, under that large number of labs, you may have some that fail creation or something like that happens. So we have created all these scripts that we used on a real customer installation just to facilitate this kind of bulk creation. Okay, and we have documented them and we have put them in this folder. So if you have this kind of wide kind of installation, feel free to come and use this script and also contact us because those are the kind of things that we like to know about. Okay, so we have talked about the IT view, professors, students, some resources, and in the end, the GitHub repo with all the scripts. Okay, so thank you very much, and that's it for me today. Bye bye.